Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined as always by my good friend, my business partner, my drinking buddy, my brother in arms, the wonderful Dram Golf, the White Walker, the White Wizard, the Whiskey Wizard.
It sounded more like what Americans do on golf courses, which is dram golf.
Oh my gosh, that is so good, Dram Golf.
That's your pronunciation. Made
Oh, it should be Galf.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Galf. Just that's what Samwise Gamgee says. No, Mr. Gandalf, don't turn me into anything unnatural.
Yours had a little bit of that tighter jaw to it. Dram golf. Name's golf. Dram golf.
You sound like Sean Connery doing it.
That's what I was trying for.
Oh, there you go. Nailed it.
That might be the first time I've ever pulled off an impression.
And you didn't even have to do the yes thing. And
that's money, Penny.
Jason.
Joshua. It sounds like you made just a horrific edit there, and you didn't. This is just transitioning. So Jason. So Joshua.
I've poured something in honor of today's guest, but interestingly, it's from a bottle that I've had probably for a good 12 years, and one that I haven't pulled the cork off of, I'd say, in the last 8 years.
That's what you were saying pre-recording button, and I'm intrigued by what has sat on your shelf for 8 years without gaining your attention. Here's a question before you tell me.
Okay, go ahead. Yep.
How do you know it's been 8 years? Was there an occasion, an event, a gathering where you viscerally remember last opening this?
That's a good question. So,
thank you.
Pro level. 8 years ago is 2013. And am I right in saying that?
Flawless math. Flawless math so far.
Please tell me that is flawless math. Do I have that right?
I'm waiting on it going off the rails real soon, but so far, so flawless.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want to judge it in proof, then I think we've got to go back to 2005.
See, there we go. It's off the rails. He tried to do some math on his feet and failed. Okay, so proof joke aside, back to why it was 8 years ago.
I think it was 8 years ago because right around 2011, 2012, when you and I started the business and then started growing the business, I was pulling back from my blog, which was jewmalt.com. And it was through jewmalt.com that I went on this path of discovery. Not that my path of discovery stopped once we started a company. That's definitely not the case. But I know that I purchased this prior to us starting the company. And after us starting the company, I feel as if, especially in 2012 and going into 2013, where I was looking for discovery when it came to the odd bottlings, my discovery was more towards the cask samples that we were receiving, and we were receiving tons of them. And I just have this gut feeling that I just sort of changed directions. That I stopped paying attention to this thing that I really wanted to pay attention to and was trying to focus more on our own single cask bottling growth, if that makes sense.
So what is this thing of which you are trying not to use the name?
So this is a 10-year-old whiskey. Do you know what it is? As soon as I said that?
Is it Glenmorangie traditional?
No.
Okay.
No, okay. This is a 10-year-old whiskey. It's bottled at full cask strength, right? Which would also make you say, is this traditional? No, it's not. It is not an official bottling of whiskey from this distillery.
Okay.
It's an independently bottled whiskey, but it was a mass-produced independently bottled whiskey. And by mass-produced, I mean, right, it wasn't a single cask. This is this was the product of many casks of whiskey married together. Let me give you another hint. It says produced and bottled by Marshall's Whiskies, Edinburgh, Scotland. Sole importer, CVI Brands, San Carlos, California.
Wow to everything.
Right? And let me see if there's a... there is a laser code, but it's kind of rubbed off. So we can't do that. Here, I'll give you a hint. You ready? Oh, there's your hint. I'm showing Jason, for the listeners, I'm showing Jason the capsule, which is that foil part just under the cork. I'm showing him the capsule, which is, it's a tin foil capsule, but it's painted gold, shiny gold.
Looks like you ripped it off with your teeth.
And I ripped it off with my teeth.
Is that the original cork topper, or is that a replacement?
No, it's a replacement. This is a synthetic single cast nation cork. So actually, wait a second. Given this cork, this is a good clue, Jason. You and I did not switch to this black synthetic cork until probably 2015. So I would say it's been 6 years since I last opened this, not 8 years.
Okay.
Oh, I love these contextual clues. That's great.
So originally, I was trying to see if this could be the Classic of Islay. Do you remember those bottlings? The Classic of Islay, but the rumor was they had Lagavulin in them.
Are you Classic of Islay, or are you thinking Finlagen?
No. Classic of Islay.
Okay.
And then there was at least a couple.
Oh, it was a green bottle.
Age.
Wasn't the Classic of Islay? It was a green frosty bottle.
Oh no.
Or there was one at one time.
No, it was a tall clear round. But it's interesting because it looks a little bit, and I haven't opened this in years and years and years and years. But I also had it on my shelf. And so I'm going to pause here for 1 second, because what you were describing about, the company and the milestones and remembering the last time you opened it, it got me thinking that around that same time, I had moved from Eastern Washington in May of 2011.
Okay.
Across to Olalla, which is on the Washington State Peninsula, north of Gig Harbor, which is north of Tacoma, which is south of Seattle. I'd moved over there, but I downsized my whiskey bottle, a collection with a very small C. And I'd moved to Olalla with like 40 bottles of whiskey, which I couldn't believe. Like, it felt like having none at all. And then in Olalla, it started to grow again, and I tried to downsize it again. Before summer of 2012, we moved from Washington State to Virginia, and I got it down to, again, I got it back down to 40 bottles to move it across the country. And one of the bottles that I haven't opened, and it jumped into my mind, is Ellenstown. And
Ellenstown 10-year-old. There you go.
Which I'd have to double check my shelf. I don't know if I've got an open bottle. If I do, it's going to be oxidized to all hell, and it should not be on my shelf any longer. But I remember that. So you're saying Ellenstown, the rumor was that was Ardbeg?
So the rumor was, and I'm nosing it, and it smells of Ardbeg to me, but you and I know, and our listeners know, I'm really terrible when it comes to blind tasting anything. But the rumor is, because there was two Ellenstowns. There was the Ellenstown 10 and the Ellenstown 12. And the rumor is the Ellenstown 10 was Ardbeg, and the Ellenstown 12 was Lagavulin. There you go. There's yours.
There they go. And, for the benefit of Vadim, who worries about my heels on my shelves, being oxidized, that's about half half full on that. Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
look at
about
that.
a similar
About the
level.
same. About the same.
Yeah, mine's just below the 10 of 10-year-old. On the
Wait.
left side of the label. On the left side of the label.
Oh, I see. Yep, and mine is just above that.
So there you go. I moved this bottle across country. It was one of the 40. And, for anybody who's done a Zoom with me or seen any recent photos, the collection is a little bigger than 40 and really starts to live up to the use of the word collection. But all right, well, so I'll keep the Ellenstown beside me in case I want to jump into it. Remember, my pour is also from the way back machine, and we discussed it in the last episode, but I didn't pull it out. And
you didn't pull it out for air.
I didn't take it out for air. Air is the enemy, and so this is one of my good Ardbeg. Oh, have I given away too much? One of my good Ardbegs that I don't want to end, and every time I take a sneaky wee pour from it, I am thinking, oh, you're up against the oxygen monster here. And I did think of Vadim this morning. This is probably running about a quarter left in the bottle. I've lost the fight. Geez. And I can tell you 100% that this came across country with me as well, because I picked up this bottle at the distillery in 2009 for £35.
Okay, 2009. Distillery only.
So it wasn't a distillery only, but the distillery was selling them.
So 2008 was Roller Coaster. 2009 was... Jeepers Creepers. What was 2009?
I'm so glad you're going down that path, because it is not going to help you guess what this is.
Oh, okay.
But it's going to allow me to make a point that I want to make.
Do I keep guessing, or do you just put me out of my misery and our listeners out of their misery?
What if I told you it was bottled in 2006?
Oh, geez, Louise. Okay, that changes things. So 2006. I don't know. I time is working against me in my brain, Jason. Like,
what if I told you it was neither very young nor almost there?
It was neither very young nor almost there. It was still young. You've got your still young. Look at that.
There you go. There's the box. Very young, bottled in 2004. Still young, bottled in 2006. Almost there, to be bottled 2007. And then they announced in 2008 they would release the 10 years old. And so,
which was the Renaissance, right? They called that the Renaissance. Right? Yeah.
Yes, they did. Yeah. Which at this point they hadn't thought of yet, because it's not on the box. And so yeah, in 2009, 3 years after its release, for £35, and it's 56.2% alcohol, distilled 98, bottled 2006, so somewhere in the wheelhouse of 8 years old. Could be 7, could be 8. It was still available at the distillery. And think, and this I think leads so beautifully to our interview today, is think about where Ardbeg has gone in the last decade. Think about the committee bottlings. Think about the special releases. Think about the alacrity with which Ardbeg disappears from shelves and online stores and distillery, right? It just moves like greased lightning. And yet Still Young was still there. That's what they should have called it, still there. 3 years. Wow. 3 years after release.
What a time to have been alive and a whiskey fan, right? 2006 for me was just about the time where I was, oh, okay, whiskey can be good. Oh, that's interesting. This was my first That's when I first started discovering it. Meanwhile, you're on Isla at the distillery in the thick of things. I was so far behind you. Wow, that's amazing. That is just amazing,
Right? And so
Jason.
it's one of the things we talk about with whiskey, and one of the things that attracts me to whiskey. And when people talk about the rapid aging and how you could get a particular set of flavors, and I say, oh, yeah, I'm sure you can. One of the things that I like about whiskey is its historical context,
Yeah.
and the story that it tells along that historical spectrum.
Mm.
And I think you just absolutely hit it out of the park on that one. Is for this being bottled in 2006, I was a decade into my whiskey journey at that point, but Still Young wasn't on my radar in 2006. Right, I was in America. It was being at the distillery in 2009.
Yeah.
And seeing it on the shelf and thinking, oh, Still Young. Oh, that's the new Ardbeg stuff. £35. Do I want to pull the trigger on that at 35? It's on the younger side. And I was there with my very good friend, Carl England, Uncle Carl, who you know as well. And we went ahead and bought it. And I'll say one more very quick thing about Ireland and about that trip is that was the trip where Carl and I were on the ferry to Isla the day that the Kilchoman inaugural release was released.
That's right.
You're right. And it sold out while Carl and I were on the ferry. And I think it was even the next day, he and I were at Lagavulin Distillery. And someone at the front desk there was on the phone saying, I'll be right over to pick up my 2 bottles. And I couldn't help overhearing, and being Scottish, you're allowed to ask follow-up questions when you accidentally overhear. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Which distillery are you heading off to pick up your couple of bottles? And they said, well, actually, it's the new one on Isla, the Kilchoman. I've got my 2 bottles over at Kilchoman. And I said, oh, we missed out on it. You don't happen to know anybody, do you? And they said, no, I had to call in favours to get these 2. And so that was the Kilchoman inaugural, even though on the way to Isla, on Isla, didn't get any bottles. Did ultimately get one at auction. And we tasted one. We had one poured for us at Skerrill's on Isla, on our first trip there, March of 2012. We had the inaugural poured for us, and it was absolutely delicious. Anyway, but look what I just did, right? And I don't apologise for it. I go from Ardbeg, bottled 2006, to being on the island 2009, to telling you about Kilchoman while I was standing at Lagavulin. Then we talk about Skerrill's in March 2012. We've just covered 6 years here with one pour. And that to me is what the historical context of whiskey is all about, and why I know this is oxidizing. I know I'm fighting a losing battle here. I know when I return to Still Young for the first time in many years, it doesn't taste like it did when it was first opened or newly opened or recently opened.
So is it still young?
It is still young. It's now what I'm drinking was distilled 23 years ago, but yes, it still left its woody home in 2006. So cheers to Still Young.
Cheers to that. And
it's still lovely remembering all those wonderful memories.
So let's pick up this conversation once again, but let's do that after we hand it off to Dr. Bill, to your good self, to myself. Is there anything you want to mention before we hand it off?
Nope. You always ask me that question right when I'm most excited to go hear from the guest. So let's press on. Bill, good to see you again. Thanks
good to be here.
So much for agreeing to a second part. We have been excited about this for a good while now. And we have to say the response to the first episode of Season 5 with you on it finally was wonderful. I want to jump actually back into some of that audio. Okay. I was re-listening to it in preparation for this episode, and buried in amongst it all, you said, I'm a yeast physiologist by training. And boy, am I filled with regrets that we didn't hit the pause button and get more out of you on that. Could you describe that to us? What was that training like? What did you learn? And what are some of the things that we don't even know about yeast?
Right. Okay. I'll start with the last question there, Jason. And one of the things that you possibly don't know about yeast. Sorry, I'm getting no interview in my office now. Fuck off and leave me alone. Sorry. One of the things that you may or may not know about yeast is that yeast is everywhere. And in fact, our bodies are totally covered in yeast. And what keeps it mainly under control is the pH of our body chemistry. And, obviously, occasionally, the yeast can get a hold and go wild. And I'm talking about strains like Candida albicans, which is the yeast that causes thrush, which, of course, guys and girls can get in their mouths and ladies can get in their... And the other one is Tinea pedis, which is the yeast, the fungal infection that causes athlete's foot and things like that. But by and large, the yeast is kept under control. But if all of us on this call today, especially David Blackmore, the filthy, mucky bastard that he is, if we were to swab our bodies and then spread it on an agar plate, you would get lots of yeasts growing up. So yeast is everywhere, and it's one of these wonderful things that since Louis Pasteur discovered that what was converting the sugar to alcohol was not God is good, as the ancient Egyptians used to say, but it was actually a microorganism. Mankind has turned that to our advantage, and yeast is used for all sorts of things. So most obviously, it's used for fermentation to create alcohol in the world of liquor. It's also used for flavorings, and a lot of savory things, potato chips and things like that, use yeast extract. You can actually buy yeast extract on its own. The famous brand name here is Marmite. In Australia, Vegemite. Yeah. So it's a most useful organism, and certain strains of yeast are also used to synthesize chemicals which are used in medicines. So yeast is something that, to the uninitiated, yeast is a bad thing. But to people who understand, yeast is one of the most wonderful, magical things in the world. And when you think of yeast, God is indeed good, in my opinion. So that's one of the things that maybe you don't know. But in terms of my studies, I studied cell biology and biochemistry at university and in Glasgow, and most of the work I did there, most of the studies were on human and animal cells, and we only vaguely touched on elements of microbiology and things like that. So when I finished my BSc, I loved university life, and if I'm quite honest about it, it wasn't just the academic aspects of university life, it was this as well. That was the sign my pal Graham and I used to use for a certain activity, which as a family man I can't possibly mention now. But I wanted to continue my studies both from a scientific perspective, but really just from a fun perspective. So the obvious thing for me to do was to study for a PhD. So I was already a reasonably highly trained and qualified scientist. And the trick with doing a PhD is to find a university which actually has grant funding for you to do your research. And, it could be the case that you could be the most fabulous guy or gal in the world, but if the university department doesn't have a grant for you to study, you can do one of two things. You can bugger off, or you can fund it yourself. So you really need to find somewhere with a grant. So with that in mind, I wrote to all sorts of other departments. My own department at Glasgow only had one grant, and the kind of rule of thumb was that they tend to look outside the department before they give it to their own departmental students. I'm not sure what the reason behind that is. My own theory was that they already know that their own students, what idiots they are, so they know you too well, so they take people externally in at first. So, I wrote to a couple of other departments in Glasgow. I wrote to the University College London. I wrote to one or two others. And I wrote to the famous Heriot Watt University in Edinburgh, where I knew they did work on sort of cell division cycle studies. So my PhD supervisor was originally kind of looking at the growth and division cycle of yeast from the perspective of synchronizing division to maximize production of chemicals, whether that be alcohol or medical things. So, it wasn't exactly what I was looking to do, but after the great melee of the summer holiday and everything, Heriot Watt was the one that actually came up with a degree of funding for me. So I'm happy to admit that when I went to Heriot Watt, it wasn't so much that I felt this would be the funkiest subject in the world. It was just they actually had funding for me. And then, of course, once I went through there, I realised that Heriot Watt had a world-class brewing department. And at the time I was there, they were starting to work more and more with the Scotch whisky industry. And I'm just going to call up something on my phone and hold it up for you here. Can you see that, guys?
Oh, look at that
Yes.
handsome young man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that handsome young man and Billy Lumsden. Well, that handsome young West Indian man is the legendary Professor Sir Jeff Palmer. And that photo was taken. I took Jeff out for lunch to celebrate him getting his knighthood. And he actually got his knighthood for all the work he does in race relations. So Jeff, as a Jamaican living in Scotland and London, advised the Metropolitan Police on race relations. And that's why he got his knighthood. But he is actually a legendary brewing scientist by training. And it was Jeff that, for whatever reason, decided to take me under his wing and advise me and tutor me a bit. And he said, Billy, he said, I know you're interested in brewing. My scientific studies were using Saccharomyces cerevisiae, good old classic brewing yeast, for fermentation. But he reckoned that there was possibly even more future in the Scotch whisky industry. So while I was doing my scientific studies, which were primarily looking at the metabolism of yeast rather than their alcohol generating capabilities, I forged friendships with people in the Scotch whisky industry. And then, as we have mentioned many, many, many times in previous discussions, in 1984, I had my legendary first proper sip of single malt Scotch whisky, which was the Glenmorangie 10-year-old at the time. So my studies sort of almost indirectly led me into the Scotch whisky industry, if I'm honest about it.
Did you see the project from Rogue Brewing maybe 10 years ago? I'm not too sure on that time frame, but their lead brewer brushed the yeast out of his beard.
Yep.
And then that's what they used in the fermenting of the beer.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't taste the product of that, but it's a perfectly feasible thing to do. And there's no question that having a fine, bristling, bushy beard, such as the one you have yourself, Dramgalf, you're bound to get lots and lots of yeast in there. So I have no issue with that at all. And some people would be freaked out by that, but yeast is yeast, whether it comes from your scrotum, your beard, or a pre-bought culture.
Well, we'll keep our eyes open for Billy Lumsden projects from Ardbeg and Glenmorangie then.
Well, there was a Glenmorangie product where you did use wild yeast.
Yeah, Alta.
Yeah, can we talk about that really quickly?
For sure, yeah. Because Joshua, that was my favourite ever whiskey project I worked on. Now, it might not necessarily have developed into the most wonderful whiskey I've ever made, but it's a project I always wanted to do. And that came from my university studies. So again, I knew. What really kicked this off was partly my own personal interest in yeast, but something that the late, great Michael Jackson said to me, and I think documented in one of his very early books. And he believed that Glenmorangie had its own proprietary yeast. In the same way as a lot of the American bourbon distillers have. And, that delighted me because I was frankly a little bit disappointed that most of the Scotch whisky industry uses the same yeast supplier. But try as I might, and I even worked with our company archivist, we couldn't actually find any record of this. So obviously I decided there and then that we were going to have our own proprietary unique yeast. And as I said earlier, the choice of where I found this, there was loads and loads of places, but we do grow our own barley, the famous Cadball barley in the fields surrounding the area where Glenmorangie House Hotel is. So while the barley was growing in the fields there, we hopped over into the field and basically took some ears of green barley from the field and basically pressed them onto agar plates, which had been sent to us by Lallemand, who is one of our main yeast suppliers. And we swabbed them onto the plates, sealed the plates, put them in a refrigerated container and sent it back down to their laboratories because, I don't have the capability in my own laboratory to culture up quantities of yeast. And, the plates were covered in wild yeast. So Lallemand isolated a handful of varieties which had genuine fermentative capacity. And eventually we narrowed it down to one which was similar genetically to Saccharomyces cerevisiae, so from the same family. And that became our own unique wild yeast.
Wow.
What's the time frame of all this? Because, I'm thinking about when you're creating a whiskey product, whiskey it's an aged product, so it takes a while to plan, to develop, to make, to mature, etc. So, what's the time frame that we're looking at this?
Yeah, the time frame for that experiment, Joshua, was kind of 11 to 12 years, and that included a couple of years to develop, isolate, culture up the yeast, and put it into production. And then just under 10 years of maturation. And, I can't remember exactly, but it was round about 8.5 to 9 years. And one of the reasons why I didn't let it go on much more than that is that the differences in character in the new make spirit were quite detectable. But, after 9-10 years of maturation in good quality cask, you're getting less and less and less and less of that difference. But the most remarkable aspect of that story is that by the time we had sampled the barley from the field, and the barley, spring barley, so that was sown end of February, beginning March, we actually sampled the ears of barley in May, June time. And by the time Lallemand had cultured up sufficient quantities of it to give me roughly 1 week's worth of production, this took quite a long time. So that was kind of May, June time. And the yeast was ready for use in June the following year. And guess what? The very same barley that we took the yeast from, our own Cadball barley, had been harvested in September. It had been dried. It had been stored to break dormancy. And then it had been malted and delivered back into the distillery in June the next year. So we used the yeast to ferment the very same barley it came from. And I'd love to claim credit for that, but that was total serendipity.
Continues a theme from the first interview.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, exactly. The serendipitous things that happen. But one last thing, Jason. I'm sorry. I know you have a question here, but
it's about the yeast. It's right within the same topic.
You know what, Jason? I'm a generous man. I'm a generous lover. You go ahead. You ask your question.
I thought I could feel something. So we talked in the last time about
Sorry, when you say a generous lover, Joshua, that means you give your partner 3 minutes worth.
Oh,
is it supposed to go that long? Okay.
Yeah, maybe over 3 occasions.
Right.
And so when we talked about different yeast and performance. Here we are back to performance again. How did this particular yeast perform for you? We do talk about yield in the industry.
Yeah.
Did it come up short? Was it within a ballpark? How did it look for you?
Basically, Jason, it did come up short, and not massively short. So if I'm looking with Laureate or something like that, which is one of the main varieties just now, to give me between 405 and 410 litres of alcohol per tonne of malt mashed. I've forgotten the name we gave to our yeast. It was a kind of rough Latin translation for God is good. So our Saccharomyces... it's irrelevant. It'll come back to me. But our own yeast gave us round about 375 to 380 litres per tonne. So, if that had been the case over a whole year's worth of production, you would start to get a bit concerned. But, for an experiment like that, I was actually highly delighted that the yield was as high as that. And I did leave the fermentations to go on a little bit longer, which can sometimes be counterproductive, because if your malolactic secondary fermentation really gets hold and you let it go too far, it can actually start to destroy alcohol. So... But, I wasn't looking for that. I was simply wanting to have our own yeast variety and wanting to make a slightly different range of flavors.
Yeah, and your description of basically bottling the whiskey a bit earlier than you would have liked makes complete sense, because I had guessed that what was coming through was nuance that you wanted to highlight, and the cask aging can just mature that out. So I was very curious as to how long does nuance last until the cask takes over, and you're back to square one.
I mean, and of course, there's no empirical answer to that question, Joshua, because it depends on the level of difference to start off with. It depends on the type of cask you're using, etc., etc.
Yeah,
I'm going to squeeze in an additional little question on yeast here. I wasn't planning to ask this, but we don't have a yeast expert in front of us every day of the week. One of those notes, just as you talked about, there comes a moment when the yeast almost starts to kind of fight back against itself, and that's one part of the process. One of those flavour notes that we sometimes get in certain whiskies would be a bile note or a baby vomit. Is one that we often talk about. Where's that coming from?
Right, okay.
What is that?
Now, that's an amazingly timely question, Jason, because guess what? I tasted at least half a dozen whiskies over the last 2 years which were utterly reeking of baby sick. Now, it's a chemical compound called butyric acid, and it's a fault. You know, butyric acid is generally caused by poor hygiene in your distillery. And in particular, if you don't clean your worts lines, which is the pipes that takes the sugary wort from the mash tun into the washback after every batch, because there's so much sugar there, you'll get bacterial infection like that. And the bacterial infection that grows up there, and I can't 100% remember which strains of bugs it is, but I can find that out for you. It produces butyric acid, which amazingly carries right through the production process into the distilled spirit. And, you know, it is a fault. And I am ultra sensitive to butyric acid. Wow. And funnily enough, I had Diane, one of the young lady scientists in my department, in the lab helping me yesterday. And Diane is also ultra sensitive to butyric acid. Today I had Anne, one of the other ladies, and she could barely pick it up in the samples. So not everyone is sensitive to it. And unfortunately, there are a few distilleries which have had a particular problem over the years. The most notable of them is Diageo's legendary Brora distillery. And while I have been privileged to taste some of these ancient and unrepeatable Brora whiskies, almost all of them have butyric acid in them. And a little anecdotal story here. I was once in K&L Liquors with Davy Driscoll outside San Francisco. But I went in and I was doing a consumer tasting event with them. And David Driscoll said, "Bill, I've got something I want you to taste here." And when someone says that to me, I always think, here we go, he's going to give me something blind and make me guess what it is. But it wasn't that at all. The carton of this particular Islay whiskey was sitting loud and proud on the desk. And I smelt it and I instantly went, "Oh, for fuck's sake." And he said, "Right, Bill." He said, "What is it?" And I said, "It's butyric acid, David." And I said, "I would go as far as to say that this is probably the worst case of butyric acid I've ever smelt." And he said, out of, if he'd sold 50 bottles or 100 bottles, he's had at least 28 bottles returned by customers. And he contacted the distillery in question. And that famous distillery beginning with the letter B said, no, that's part of the character of the whiskey. And I said, "No, it's fucking not. That's not part of the character of it. That is a fault." So, baby sick, butyric acid. Apologies for the F-bombs there.
No, you're among friends here. This is easy peasy. Yep. I could continue to go down the off notes, but I'm going to save it for part 3 because we have said this has to be a trilogy.
Okay,
Bill. Okay, trilogies sell. Yeah, sequels are good.
Guys, good luck with that, guys. I'm a busy man.
We're going to hunt you down. We've had 2 different settings for these first 2 interviews. We'll have a third setting for the final part.
Hey, Bill, if I can give 3 minutes over 3 sessions, I think you could do something similar.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
You're a generous interviewee, Bill. Yeah. So a name that now has new import for me, given today's conversation, Ardbeg Wee Beastie.
Yeah.
Now I know the wee beasties that are being referred to in that Ardbeg. Josh and I were talking about this in the last episode, not necessarily in the interview. And we thought you did something interesting there that we wanted to discuss with you, where a new addition to the Ardbeg line, where you've got a non-age statement Corryvreckan, and you've got a non-age statement Ugadal. Then you've got the age statement 10. And I know there's some additional add-ons older than that. But what... in an industry where it's NES or it's 8 or 10 or 12, a 5. What was going on there? What did you want to achieve with Wee Beastie with a big 5 front and centre?
Okay, no, again, it's a very good question. And I'm going to remind you of something you said at the start of this section about Ardbeg's own Wee Beasties, and now you know what's going on. Actually, hold that thought, gents, of Wee Beasties, because I've got something coming out this year for Ardbeg which takes that concept to crazy new heights. You know, this is Wee Beastie City. This has gone mad, and it's an experiment I always wanted to do along the same lines as the Alta, but much more wacky and out there. This is playing on a different type of fermentation, and we've had to register the name and the label for cola registration, so I think people have seen it. And the product is called Fermutation.
I have seen that.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
And I'm not going to tell you anything else about it, but you know, think about it, and you'll put 2 and 2 together, and maybe get 8 to start off with, but you'll get there. So, Jason, back to your question.
Yes, sir.
What I like about the Wee Beastie is that this was not marketing or anything browbeating me into this because we were short of stock. This actually fell out of a thought that Hamish Torrey, our lovely former Ardbeg brand manager, and myself always had, that some of our Ardbeg drinkers were so fanatic that, you know, they didn't want 20, 25-year-old, elegant, refined Ardbegs. They wanted to suck the spirit straight out the spirit safe. They wanted to get as close to the source as possible. They wanted to wring Mickey Heads, the manager's socks out, and drink that liquid. You know, they were that fanatical at getting to the source. And, you know, selling the new make spirit, we all felt was just one step too far. So I thought, well, I'm going to try and make a younger style. And, you know, for Glenmorangie, it just wouldn't have worked because that very delicate, soft spirit at Glenmorangie needs nuanced by a nice bit of creamy oak. Whereas with Ardbeg, you could argue that at least 50% of the flavour profile is essentially what you find in the new spirit with all these smoky notes. So it became easier to do that. And, you know, I put together quite a number of prototype recipes and ended up with one that I felt, you know, that this actually works with the PX cask and a bit of the new charred oak and so on and so forth. And, you know, unquestionably, it's less subtle than the 10-year-old. It's certainly less subtle than Ugadal or things like that. And I honestly felt that people would find this interesting and would have a certain curiosity value. But honestly, I'm flabbergasted with demand. And we planned to sell X on the first year, and we ended up selling 5 times X. So people have really enjoyed the story of Wee Beastie and such like. So that's kind of where it came from.
So why the combination of the name and the age statement? Did you ever think Ardbeg 5-year-old just as a 1-2 punch? What was the name and the age statement combination?
We like to give almost all our Ardbeg whiskies some sort of name, and it's kind of part of the tradition now, and it gives a little bit of extra personality. And I was almost certainly quoted as saying, my God, it's a beast of a dram, or it's a monster of a dram. So that's where it came from. And of course, we had the legendary Arinam Bestia, the beast, back in the day, which I always was slightly uncomfortable with, because even although it was called the Beast, it was one of the more subtle and creamy Ardbegs I had made. So this was kind of playing on the theme of the Beast, really.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love the Wee Beastie, and you know, if you've seen your your estimates exceed expectations, I might be responsible for a small pocket of that.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah.
I've bought a fair rake of this and shared it with friends and sold bottles on to friends at cost, of course. But one of the additional parts we talk about is you can often find it for between $40 and $45 a bottle, which a single malt at 47.4 in a 75 cl bottle in that price range, that is that remarkable. Younger,
yeah,
and I mean this in a nice way, a more aggressive Islay whiskey. Gosh, that checks all my boxes. Yeah. That's every box.
And the other thing I would say here, guys, is that I don't set the pricing on our products, although as a director of the company, I'm often involved in the debate and can shape the conversation. But, we didn't want to take the piss with this. And, it is younger than the 10. So therefore, we all believed we had to price it a bit less than that. But the other thing I would say here is that I am doffing my cap to Diageo here, and I loved their bold move to put out an 8-year-old Lagavulin. And
agreed.
I remember back in the day when I first started drinking single malt back in the 80s, Talisker was 8 years old, Rosebank was 8 years old. There was a lot of famous single malts that had a younger age statement on it. And I just liked the clarity and the honesty of it.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I applaud it, and I certainly support it with my dollars. I also support Lagavulin 8 with my dollars.
Yeah,
it's another absolute cracker.
Decent product, yeah. I have to say, I've seldom tasted a Lagavulin that I think is not a good product. It's a real class act.
Yep. Very true.
Agreed. I had a quick question. I know, Jason, you had some more Ardbeg questions coming up. I've got an Ardbeg question of my own, and this stems from a conversation Jason and I had in a previous episode where we talked about how fun it can be to find variations in whiskeys from batch to batch. And one of the things that I quite enjoy about Ardbeg 10 is that there always seems to be something new to find. It's always a little different. And so much so where I say to myself, I wonder if Bill is just having a bit of fun saying, you like that one? Try this. And now it's got a little extra twist to it, right? And it doesn't seem as if you're looking for strict consistency all the time. Yes, it stays within that rubric of Ardbeg 10, and it's unmistakable, but there's always something a bit new from batch to batch. And I just wonder, is that you're doing? Is that natural variability? Like, how is that put together, and how are you creating that?
Again, I'm loving the astuteness and intelligence of these questions you're asking me, guys. I do a lot of interviews, and frankly, I get asked a lot of dumb questions sometimes. But hey, I always try and be polite. So that's an excellent question. And Joshua, I'd love to sit here and claim credit for slightly varying the 10-year-old. And, on occasions, I have done that with both Ardbeg 10 and Glenmorangie Original. But for Ardbeg 10, the demand for Ardbeg has grown so much over the last few years that I don't always have the luxury of being able to put together a consistent recipe in terms of ratio of first to second and to refill casks. So what you are picking up on a lot of the time is these natural variations. Now, obviously, I would never release something if I didn't think it was good enough to do that. But within that, I enjoy the batch-to-batch variations. And, the recipe of Glenmorangie Original is much more consistent. But even within that, you still get batch-to-batch variations. And we only use first and seconds for Glenmorangie. And typically, I'm targeting a 60-40 ratio. But on a typical week, I might get 3 samples like this from the distillery for me to approve from the dispatch vat before it goes down to the bottling hall. And I'm loving the variation in there. And for original, sometimes it's very buttery, creamy vanilla. Other times you get a bit more of the citrusy bite. And actually, one or two of the vattings of Ardbeg 10-year-old, particularly last year, there was almost too much first fill bourbon character in there. And don't get me wrong, I was enjoying the whiskey, but I thought that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's moving towards a much creamier, silkier style. But as I say, I have much less leeway to play around with the recipe for Ardbeg just because of the stock holding we have.
Sure. Cheers. Thank you for that.
Well, with an interesting time, and I know you said at the beginning that you've got a hard Brexit, I'll ask you a two-parter that isn't nearly as much time as I would like to discuss with you. But we understand you, as you mentioned a moment ago, are a busy chap, and we appreciate you coming back for round two. So we're back to this episode is going live on June 2nd.
Okay.
And obviously Ardbeg Day is June 5.
Yeah.
And so my two-part question will lead up to asking you about Scotch. But each year...
Yikes, I'm going to get fired here, guys.
Well said. So
I just see what you did there.
See what I did there?
You're dealing with... You've got these new wrinkles, right? You've got your alligator char from back in the day.
Yeah.
You've got your roller coaster looking at 10 years of the committee. You've got the Pinot Noir barrels. You've got some rum going on. Are you looking around the world trying to work out what the next unique expression can be? Does that come with its own built-in pressure? Do you get to a point where you're trying to balance flavor with marketing, with unique? What's all that look like for you? And then talk to us about Scorch, this year's release.
Okay, so the first thing I would say here, Jason, is I don't balance anything with marketing. If I let marketing dictate what I do, then I may as well give up. So
I'm glad I gave you the opportunity to say that out loud.
I don't mean that in a nasty way towards the marketeers, but that immediately gives me a handicap. It gives me a restriction, and I have no restrictions other than generally, is it legally going to be called Scotch whisky? And sometimes it isn't, I have to say. But I always try and approach things with no restrictions whatsoever. So the gloves are off all the time. And my inspiration for products will come from anywhere and everywhere. So yes, I look round the world. Yes, I look in my own drawer beside my bedside, just anywhere that the inspiration can come from. And sometimes I'm just trying to think, wouldn't be interesting to try and generate a particular type of flavour. But what I would say is with Ardbeg, it's quite difficult to because you are releasing products which, real aficionados of the brand will be able to tell the difference, but not everyone can, because there's always that omnipresent peat there. But I have done some really wacky things at Ardbeg over the last decade, and the next few releases coming through are going to be pushing the envelope a little bit here. Some things that you would not normally think of doing, one or two things you probably wouldn't be allowed to do elsewhere. So as I say, there is no restriction to what we're trying. The other challenge is, due to a combination of ever-growing demand, and I need to choose my words very carefully here. The dollar signs flashing up in the eyes of sales and marketing people. I'm being asked to grow the size of the Ardbeg Day offering each year, and sometimes that's just not possible. Because, these are experiments I'm kicking off maybe 12 years ago sometimes. And, particularly if you're using a certain batch of barrels. You're not saying, could I have enough barrels, Mr. Wine Producer, to give me 7,042 9-litre cases after 12 years of maturation? It doesn't work that way. It's a little bit of an inexact science. But see, we've got some goodies coming through, and I want to keep my powder dry. But Project Big and Chunky, Project Salty Dog, Project Mole, they're all coming through on the pipeline. And I would be surprised if you were able to work out from these names what any of them actually are. But if you do work that out, I'll give you a nice gift from my own personal cellar. So, Scorch.
Yes,
basically, it's a kind of there's a double whammy here. There is the whiskey itself and why I made it, and then there's a bit of a marketing story in there. So please do not ask me to talk about the marketing story, because I'm not going to, okay? I'm sure you may have read it, and it is what it is. But when I made Ardbeg Alligator all these years ago, and actually I've been pestered by Moet Hennessy Germany to give, somebody's asking for precise information and details on the way the casks were charred. And I thought, for fuck's sake, that was 15 years ago, So I've been trying to find records for that. But to make Ardbeg Alligator, I got Speyside Cooperage to give me the most brutal level of char they could, to the extent that, big chunks of the char layer were starting to fall off the wood. It was that heavily charred. And that's because I was looking for something, a big hit fairly quickly. But these casks were very expensive, and I believe there was still a lot of life in them. And, so partly because of that reason, and partly just as an experiment, I decided to refill them with new make spirit. And I can't even remember when we released Ardbeg Alligator. I think it was about 11 years ago.
Somewhere around there, 2011 maybe.
Yeah. So
I want to say 13.
Was it, okay. You could be right, Joshua, but
13.
So the end result of that is Scorch, and I wasn't originally planning on putting that into the pipeline, but when I tasted the whiskey, I thought, I really quite like this, and I think it will be it'll appeal to Ardbeg geeks who would want to see the end result of what happened to the alligator casks. So that's basically what Scorch is. I called that project Baby Snapper because it was the second use of the alligator cask, and my friends in marketing decided that Baby Snapper was not an appropriate name, and instead they were going to call it Scorch. And I think, boring. But anyway, there you go.
It was 2011.
It was 2011, right? Okay. So I thought it was that because I kind of know the age of Scorch, and the mathematicians amongst you will very quickly be able to work out the age of the whiskey in the bottle of Scorch.
Yeah, that's lovely. I also like those types of projects though, where we can now go and take our bottle of Scorch and put it next to the bottle of Alligator that we've got stored, waiting to open for some special occasion.
Yep.
And put the two side by side. I love projects that allow us to do that.
Which was always what I was intending to do, Jason, with that. But my friends in marketing seem to think that wasn't a convincing enough story. So they invented some old twaddle about a dragon or something like that. So there you go. The final thing I'll say is I got asked a question by someone in Japan, and they said, Bill, can you tell us what is a dragon char cask? And I said, I don't fucking know. I've no idea. Bad Billy.
Oh my gosh. Well, that seems to take us right to your hard stop at 3, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sorry about this, gents, but yeah, I do have another little meeting coming up after this, so I hope that's given you some more interesting information. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and let's do tee up part 3.
Oh, part 3 in person. That's the condition. Part 3 in person.
Okay, well, I am fully intending to come to the United States this year. David knows that, so...
brilliant.
Yep.
I will make September work. Thanks ever so much, Bill. Always great to see you, and thanks for your honesty. Closing out part 2 with a whiskey legend, and knowing that we're going to have a part 3 when we can meet in person again.
Yes.
Is really, really fun and really cool. And I'll tease ahead to an undisclosed number of episodes into the future here.
Okay.
Where I got to... I think I actually teased this in the last episode of One Nation Under Whiskey, that I was about to do an in-person interview with Bill Thomas at Jack Rose. Mm-hmm. I have since conducted that in-person interview with Bill Thomas. And in talking to Bill, I actually referenced this series with Bill Lumsden. And I said, Bill Thomas, you're a bit like Bill Lumsden here. It's taken us 5 years to sit down and have this first interview with you. But already I want to schedule part 2. Yeah. Because there was stuff Bill Thomas and I didn't get to. And I tried to keep the interview to an hour, ended up a full 90 minutes of speaking with Bill. A little break here and there for a fresh pour and what have you. Mm-hmm. But it was a big, big chunk of recording. And when we hit stop, Bill had said, there's a bunch of stuff we never covered there that you and I talked about before we hit record. And so to have that with Bill Thomas, to hear we have this with Bill Lumsden, it's nice to be jumping into some of these series of conversations. We did it with Dave Broom, where we hadn't had Dave on for the longest time, and then boom, 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 we keep lining up Dave Broom, and it's just brilliant sitting down, having the chats that we've been wanting to have for the longest time, and as we always say, then getting to share them with the listener, the dear listener. And so part 2 with Bill Lumsden was really tremendous. I know we squeezed in some time between appointments for him, and we kind of blazed a trail through some of the questions that we had. But I know in part 3 in person that we will sit there and dram and chat and record. You might have more editing to do at the end of that one. That one might get a little familiar. If you know what I mean by a little familiar.
I'm familiar with this term here.
But wasn't that a ton of fun and learning a bit more about yeast and being able to really place him as a scientist? Again, we talked about it leading into the interview there, but even when we talk to people, and I did the same thing with Bill Thomas, and we've done it with everybody we've spoken to, I thoroughly enjoy placing people, the interview subject, within their own historical context. Mm-hmm. So when Bill Lumsden comes to us as the creator of Ardbeg releases and Glenmorangie releases, there's so much more on the Bill Lumsden historical spectrum that we don't know, we haven't known, unless you maybe followed some interviews with him in some other places. But giving him a chance to even just in his own mind put on the white lab coat of being a yeast physiologist. A yeast physiologist was what a job title to then be the man behind the Ardbeg committee releases.
And speaking of which, I think one of the most refreshing things for me from this conversation was in speaking with Bill, we got to dig past the marketing that Ardbeg does. And I think we said it in the interview, Scorch was not fully on, it was not fully on my radar initially until he said, oh, no, these are the reused casks. These are the second fill casks from Alligator. You say, all right, now we can do a side-by-side of Alligator to Scorch and see what second fill recharred casks or second fill charred, extra heavy charred casks are going to do. Like Scorch didn't make sense. It's a fun name. The label looked fun and all of that. But when we get into why they chose the name Scorch, and now we hear it's a throwback to those original Alligator casks, now all of a sudden I'm excited. And so I'm glad that he was able to talk about that. And my hope is, my personal hope, is that aspect of releases moving forward gets incorporated into the overall fun story that Ardbeg always does. They always have a fun story. They always have a fun release that they're doing. But that little bit of information that I like seeing that connective tissue there. And that's important for me as a drinker.
In talking about the committee releases, I've poured another Ardbeg here. And it's been interesting because some of the committee releases have sat well with me and some haven't sat nearly as well. And we always say roller coaster, roller coaster, roller coaster, roller coaster, roller coaster, roller coaster. And invariably you say, and I just had this conversation with Elijah the other day, where you say, this committee, whatever the name is, this one's good. It's no roller coaster.
Yes.
And it's right,
all the time.
It's a tough,
all the time.
It's a tough spot to be. And so the committee bottling that I just poured here is one that invariably comes. It's the next thing I name when someone says, so what's your favorite committee? Well, the answer is always roller coaster. Well, what's your next favorite? Well, I quite liked insert this name there.
I would say, because I know you weren't the biggest fan of Alligator. Indeed. You weren't as big a fan of it as I was, that's for sure.
I think I would enjoy Alligator returning to it. I didn't like all of the selling it as the big char, the heavy char, the Alligator char.
Because it didn't present that way.
And then it was this big lemon meringue pie, fresh citrus, coastal sea malt.
Yeah.
If you pitched it as that, you might have got my attention. But all the char, which is why we have gone ahead and ordered some Scorch, because I do want to revisit it with more knowledge of Alligator. So yes. So that was just to put some leaves on those branches of why Jason is not a big Alligator fan. Continue.
I would so I know you and I definitely are not in the same camp when it comes to the next best committee release after Roller
Yeah, you said
Coaster.
some strange things in the last Lumsden episode that I haven't stopped thinking about since then.
I think you mean I said some correct things. Anyway.
I think I'm going through a tunnel.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that your second favorite one is Dark Cove.
I was trying to keep the color from you as well.
Was I right? It's Dark Cove.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's sherry meets Ardbeg. And again, I think it shows the tension between what one can do in charge of whiskey projects, whiskey maturation, and what happens when that release then gets into the hands of the marketers. Because you get things like dark sherry casks, just like we ran into, the dragon cask from Scorch, right? Where you're like, people playing marketing bingo in a boardroom have come up with some words here. And so I think it's pretty easy to dismiss Dark Cove when you see things like dark sherry casks, the darkest Ardbeg ever. Like that I don't think is doing itself any service with whiskey nerds, whiskey geeks, Ardbeg hardcore fans. But if you can get past that and access the whiskey, I was very pleasantly surprised by Dark Cove.
You know, the more we talk and the more it sounds like we're shitting on the marketing department and perhaps suggesting that the marketing is not necessarily, doesn't match the whiskey, I can't not help but think that it's also fun. Like, so long as you're in the know, so long as you know what's in your glass, what it's comprised of, I like the fun. I don't have too much against it, so long as I'm getting the truth behind it. Do you hate the fun?
I hate fun. Yeah. I'm not in this to have fun.
Isn't whiskey supposed to be fun, Jason?
So what about this then? What about the fact that the fun doesn't go far enough? It feels like corporate fun. It feels like if you went to a corporate team building retreat and the person in charge of the schedule said, boy, are we going to have fun. You would immediately roll your eyes, look at your closest friend within the corporation and go, this is going to be fucking miserable. And you would both know that that's exactly how it would play out. Corporate fun is always safe fun. It's a version of fun, but it's a lowercase f fun.
See, but here's the thing. You're talking to someone who loves Disney and going to Disney World. Right? It's like everything is built to an 8/10 scale, right? Everything is just almost. Just like this is just almost. And I kind of like that. I'm okay living in that spot that you find so incredibly uncomfortable.
Wow. Okay. So moving on. What have you done a second pour?
I did. Yeah, I'm doing a second pour. And
so what's your second pour? And then we'll thank Bill, and then we'll jump off into the news. Because boy, do we have some.
Boy, do we ever.
Again, let me make sure I'm pronouncing this correctly. Good news. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Good. See, I would say good, and you said good, like Gouda, like the cheese.
Good.
So what I'm pouring is a very interesting release because there was a committee version of it, and then there was a distillery-only version of it, and they were different. And they were different by 0.2 percentage points on the ABV. And I preferred the one that was 0.2 less than, and that was the distillery version. So this is my second favorite committee release after Roller Coaster, and it's Perpetuum.
And that was the very strange thing that you said on the last Bill Lumsden episode that I have not stopped thinking about since you said it.
Oh, such a brilliant whiskey. I think it does a wonderful job of honoring older style, softer Ardbeg, which you know I'm a big fan of.
So, Perpetuum was one of those funny ones where I remember being at a launch of Perpetuum in DC. And the word around the tasting was that it was a very feminine Ardbeg. And for those who wanted...
Said a bunch of white men. Go on, continue.
With beards. And and I think, I remember this from way back in the Good Scotch Drink days when I wrote a review of Arim Nam Beist. And I talked about Arim Nam Beist being kind of an old dusty lady up in the attic. And the Beist part of the name, the beast, really didn't play out. But if you wanted to talk to me about older, softer, gentler, arguably more feminine Ardbeg, I would listen to what you were saying. Given our conversation about Beist in the last Lumsden episode, given your mention of Perpetuum in the last episode and again today, it really fits your Ardbeg palate and absolutely did not fit mine. And now you've got me curious.
Yeah.
What was your take on RØDE?
I'm going to be 100% honest with you, Jason. I never had it. I've never had a sip of it.
Oh, interesting.
Yep. It was one that was on my radar. I wanted to try it, and I just never got around to trying it. I missed getting the committee bottling, and I was feeling FOMO for all of those who got the gold bottle of it, and there's that. But yeah, I never got to try it, so I can't talk to it.
Okay. It's my most disappointing Ardbeg, is the RØDE.
And that could be part of the reason why I didn't grab it, because I don't think that you're alone. I think there were a lot of people who thought it wasn't to their palate. But here's what I have to say. This is my second favorite committee release. My jam all day long is Ardbeg like roller coaster. Like very young, like still young, or like wee beastie at 5 years old, right? I like those bigger, punchier Ardbegs, but it's always nice to just put your feet up, right? Relax a little bit and pour some Perpetuum, pour some Arinam Becht. And the last thing that I'll say about the Perpetuum,
Yes.
it has something in it that I think It has something in it that I wish other Ardbegs had. There's a salty component to it that is really almost over the top, but it packs such a salty umami punch to it. It's so pleasing. It just makes me want to sip and sip and sip.
It's so interesting that you say that about the Perpetuum as it sits as your second favourite committee. As I'm sitting here sipping this Dark Cove, arguably my second favourite committee, I think that's a big, strong claim. This Dark Cove is sooty on the back.
Yes.
And Ardbeg isn't often, certainly in the Ardbegs I've explored, it isn't often sooty. I might get chipotle pepper. I might get white chocolate, a big fattiness to it. You might get the citrus notes that we talked about coming through something like an alligator. I even get those green olive notes coming through the roller coaster with the cheese and onion crisps. I don't often get a sootiness, and yet this Dark Cove is delivering that.
Yep.
So there you go. It's that little break from the norm that elevates our committee selections.
And that's
our faves,
it.
At least.
And that's it. And, I think, and then this will be the last thing that I'll say, is Ardbeg is such a strong spirit. It's a forceful spirit, in my opinion. For the most part, a forceful spirit. But what I find interesting about some of the committee releases is that the difference tends to be more nuance. And that's how you have to look at it. You have to focus your palate to look for the nuance. And when you find it, the reward is phenomenal. It really is. And that's what I found about the Perpetuum. It was that salty characteristic to it. And I didn't mind the softness. I don't mind softer, older style Ardbeg. I think it has its place. But when you amplify it with that salty edge, it just becomes moreish, and I like that. And I like that.
Yeah, sometimes you can get that little bit of salt on dark chocolate.
Yes.
Going on with some of the Ardbegs. Yep. That is very appealing. Well, as we've said a gamillion times, thanks so much to Bill Lumsden for making time for us for a part 2, and even back in part 1, recognizing the need for a part 2. And now as we build the trilogy, and we will see what I did there, build the trilogy. You're welcome, Joshua. Yeah, I know you looked at me like I was saying that to my dog, so I had to pause for a moment just to really bask in what I was doing there. So as we build the trilogy, can't wait to see him in person, can't wait to dram. It might be 2021, it might be 2022, but the trilogy will occur, and it will be more Return of the Jedi than it will be whatever was a poor trilogy. Alien?
Wait, no. You just made a suggestion that Return of the Jedi was somehow a good third. It was Star Wars, and therefore it was good. But in the grand scheme of things, it was a terrible movie by comparison to Empire and New Hope. I mean, everybody knows this.
But I feel like as trilogies go, Jedi can complete a trilogy, whereas something like
Return of the King, Jason. Return of the King. I'll just put it out there.
Oh God, no! It was too long. It had 5 different endings.
Oh yeah, the 5 different endings was
so
terrible.
self-indulgent. No,
It's not like a Zack Snyder film. It wasn't that self-indulgent.
Well, yes, yeah. Cinema has gone to a dark place in the decade and a half since we had Return of the King. Yeah, Zack Snyder should not be mentioned in any conversations about really movie making. Anywho, we will have a tour de force third part with Bill Lumsden at a future date.
Looking forward to that.
Let's wake up the paperboy and transition to another segment.
Extra, extra! Read all about it! Life story of Playboy Penny! Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it! Me and that Playboy in trouble!
Can I, Jason, lead with what I think is the most important bit of news, the most exciting bit of news to
Is this the G-O-O-D?
This is the G-O-O-D. You down with the G-O-O-D?
You know me.
Regular listeners will remember in
If you can cast your mind back to one episode ago.
Yeah, so in our previous One Nation Under Whiskey, who was our guest?
Matt Hoffman of Westland.
Hoffman of Westland, yes. Yeah, all right. Oh my gosh.
Do you see what we were doing in that news segment now? Oh, look at you.
Oh,
Today,
gosh.
Joshua gets his wings.
Oh gosh, I got my wings. Give me a Red Bull.
Whiskey Cherub finally gets his wings.
Holy crap. We'd reported at that time that 5 weeks had gone by, and the trucking company that was meant to deliver our 2 Westland casks from Seattle to Bardstown, Kentucky, promptly lost the shipment and didn't know where it went. And not only didn't know where it went, basically didn't respond to any of the emails that we would send them. And I'll be very honest with you. I would suggest that I sent between 20 and 30 very diplomatic emails with very simple questions that warranted answers. And of those 20 to 30 emails, I would say we received 1 to 2 responses.
Yep, very much so.
And those 1 to 2 responses did not answer any of the questions that we have previously asked. So, and actually this is perfect, Jason, because you mentioned his name earlier on. After that episode dropped, I got a message from Vadim. And Vadim had said, oof, I heard what happened. I hope you can find it. Something similar happened to me. And I said, oh my gosh, was it resolved? And he mentioned that things got resolved. And he mentioned he had to get a bit heavy-handed and get other people involved to be a bit heavy-handed. I'm not going to mention any names, anything like that. But I said, you know what? I spent the past 20 to 30 emails being a diplomat. Mm-hmm. I'm going to send an email that will be very pointed, a bit scathing, a bit unlike me. And wouldn't you know it?
So that's what I thought when I saw it on Monday morning.
And wouldn't you know it, the next day they found our shipment. After 7 weeks.
Unbelievable.
After 7 weeks at that point. 7-ish weeks, they finally found our shipment.
We had Jess, our dear Jess, in Glasgow saying, you guys are in America. Why haven't you lawyered up yet? And she also is certainly, one of the most passionate Westland lovers I know. Oh, yes. And here's 2 drums of SCN, the company she's with and deeply, deeply committed to, with 2 Westlands just within your fingertips going lost. I think, yes, her suggestion of lawyering up and going hard to bring home these Westlands. And I said, Joshua is emailing. Joshua is staying on top of it. And then I said, Joshua has sent a very strongly worded email, very strongly, which is, this shipment is valued at this. The sales off the back of this are that. And then you had such a great line in there of, this is salary. This is food on people's tables. Right, like the real world consequences of whiskey going missing for a whiskey company. And then, as you say, the next day, it was found after 7 weeks in the desert.
Yep, and the comment before I sent that email was, geez, it looks like you should probably file a claim. And I led my response with, nope, we're not prepared to file the claim. We're prepared to get some questions answered. We're prepared to have this escalated within your organization because of the very reasons, Jason, that you just paraphrased.
Yeah, no, that was one of the biggest issues. We had it where we lost some of our last year's 24-year-old unnamed bourbon. We lost some of that to damage in transit.
Yep.
That's a thing that happens, and you try to roll with the punches. And those that we reached out to were very understanding about the loss. But when it's simply 2 casks with a professional haulage company going missing, that's a bigger issue. So yes, the good news is they are found. The good news is they are now sitting at our bottling hall. We are just awaiting a bottling date, and that was one of the things we put in. And again, I won't attach numbers to it, but there is a 4-digit fine. And let me just say, it is not 1,000. There's a 4-digit fine for missing your bottling date for any reason. Mm-hmm. And we, through no fault of our own, missed our bottling date for the Westlands. Our bottler was very understanding. We greatly appreciate them being wonderful partners on this.
100%.
But now we need to get back into the schedule. And, through absolute no fault of the bottling hall, they are busy. The reason we get bottling dates about 4 weeks in advance is because they are busy. And to now try and squeeze back into it for these 2 found casks is tricky. So, as always, watch this space, listen to the news segment on the podcast, follow Single Cask Nation Facebook page for members only. Make sure you answer the questions and you'll find out when this is coming. And these will both be lottery. Still waiting on final numbers. One of them will be in the very low 200s number of bottles. One of them will be around the mid 200, somewhere around 250, plus or minus, depending on
line loss and things like that. Damage in transit.
Reasons. But we are over the moon. That was some of the hardest news we delivered on the last episode of One Nation Under Whiskey, and now this is some of the best news we've delivered, that they live.
Yeah, and the other thing about it that was killing me was the fact that you and I had been tracking these 2 particular casks for going on 4 years. Right? It's like I've been nurturing this child for 4 years. Oh, we can't find your child. Wait, what? And you may as well just file a claim because we can't find it. No, hold on. We've been nurturing this. We've been paying attention to this. This has been our baby.
2 7-year-old casks of Westland don't simply grow on trees.
They don't. They donate. They don't. They donate. They don't.
So there you go. So so happy to be sharing this with the listeners who it was lovely to have people reach out. I'm going to leave it at that. It was good to have people reach out and say, wow, this is kind of devastating. Yes, it is. That's why we run a transparent industry podcast where we say, here are our hearts.
Oh, I know.
The haulage company has trod all over them. Please give us succor.
The number of people who reached out to say, oh, I'm sorry this is happening. And I would, the response is, sister, you're right. Brother, you're right. Like, yeah, this is something. This is something. But it is now in the past. The casks are now at our bottling hall. And soon, dear listener, like Jason had said, these will go on lottery. And we're looking at, what is this going to be on sale for?
$125 a bottle. It will reflect the single cask pricing that one sees at the Westland Distillery.
And you know, throughout the country as well. I was looking at one that was exclusive to the New York market, and I think that one was just a hair shy of 3 years old, and that one was $130. This is 7 years old at $125. So it's still in line with the single cask pricing, but you're getting a few extra years, which is pretty nice.
Yeah. Oh, and this is great. I really feel like we're sharing with friends. I feel like I'm on a phone call with friends when I'm saying this. Here's something I've said to you this week. I've said it to Jess this week. I've said it to Elijah this week. I've had those 2 Westland sample bottles in front of my keyboard on my desk since we got this most recent round of samples from Westland, and we moved into the, okay, here's the invoice, here's the loading, here's the movement. And for 7 weeks, I have looked at the last portion of these 2 samples in front of my keyboard on my desk, thinking, will we see you again? Will we have the chance to put these in front of the nation?
Yeah.
And to get that news last Tuesday was to say, yes, gosh, what a brilliant, brilliant success. Over the moon that they've been found, that we can share them, that we can put them out to the nation, because they're exemplary. They are 2 of the best Westlands I have ever had.
The 7-year-old peated is the best Westland I've ever had. And I remember enjoying it as a 3.5, 4-year-old quite a lot. And we both did, and we said, "Oh, you know, let's see what this does." And then you sent me the sample. It is by far the most glorious Westland I've ever had. So it's been found. We will bottle it. It will be released. I am over the friggin' moon.
Well, let me say this then. So the last time you and I were at the distillery together coincided with the selection of these casks, coincided with the last Whiskey Jubilee in Seattle. And in the distillery, they had a Muscatel Westland. And I have made no bones about the fact that that is one of my favorite Westlands.
Bought a 6-pack of it, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. And this 7-year-old Muscatel Westland is exemplary. And that's the thing you can't really tell the holier, right? You don't understand how good these whiskies are. Instead, you just got to say, you don't understand how much we paid for these whiskies, right?
Wait a second. You said this is a good whiskey? Hold on a second. All right. We
exactly right.
Found it.
Yeah, Cask 4856 was the one we bought the 6-pack of, March 15, 2018.
There you go. Okay.
And those only came in half bottles.
Yeah. So that's our Westland news. Jason, what else do we have to bring to our listeners, if anything?
Yep. We have a pickup scheduled. Jess is thoroughly in charge of all this. We have a pickup scheduled for our US retail release number 7 that you alluded to previously, which will include one online bottling, which is the Stones of Stenness 17-year-old Orkney.
That's right.
That we talked about in the news segment of the last podcast. And there will be more on that coming later, not for today. And we've got our first big pickup for retail Canada.
That's right, Alberta. Yep.
And so that hopefully will get on the move in June. And so if you're in Canada, if you're specifically in Alberta, go looking for Single Cask Nation. We have some different places who will be bringing it in. Our dear friend Graham Usher has been leading the charge on Single Cask Nation coming into Alberta for years and years and years. And we have dabbled, we have tried, we've had a few attempts, a couple of attempts. This is the big one.
This is the big one.
Is the real deal. And Whiskey Drop, Graham Usher is Whiskey Drop in Canada. So do a Google search for Whiskey Drop and delve further there. But yeah, we're making a huge step into Canada with this delivery.
100%. Yeah, I'm so excited. And what's nice about it too for the Canadians is because Canada accepts both, I mean, I guess the US does now as well, but Canada traditionally has accepted both the 700 ml and 750 ml. So because of this, Canada is getting some of the US stuff, release number 7 that's coming to the States, but they also got some of our earlier UK EU stuff as well. So if you're in Canada, you'll be able to dig into a wider spectrum of Single Cask Nation bottlings, which is very cool.
Yeah, it looks wonderful, and Jess has headed that up, and now we've got Elijah on the North American side as well. So, yeah, bless both Jess and Elijah, wonderful human beings who represent Single Cask Nation as if it's their own. And that's exactly what we were hoping for when we brought them both in.
100%. Yep. Hashtag blessed, Jason.
Hashtag my hashtag.
All right. Yes.
And just quickly, before we get out of here, we have selected ROW, Rest of the World, retail release number 3. And in the next episode, we're going to have Jess along to talk more about that.
I can't wait. What we've planned for this release has me incredibly excited. So cool.
Yeah, agreed.
I think right now might be a good time to bring up an email that we received. Did you want to bring that to our attention? Good sir? Good Dram Galf? Dram Galf?
Dram golf. Sometimes I find the Scottish accent, the thicker Scottish accents, are how you breathe. I'll leave that out there to percolate.
Really quickly.
In the perpetuum.
One of my... look what you did there.
I'm hitting this dark loaf so hard. I'm so thoroughly enjoying this.
I poured a little roller coaster while you were talking. You should do the same, Jason.
Did we pour any roller coaster in episode 1 or part 1 of the Bill Lumsden?
I can't remember. I remember the reason I opened my bottle, which I can't say publicly why I opened my final bottle of roller coaster, but let's just say it was one of the happiest times in my life, one of the happiest times in your life.
I killed my roller coaster one of the last times you and I drank together.
Oh, did you?
I don't have a roller coaster in my office.
You don't have a roller coaster, Jason. This is a travesty. This is a Travis Williams-ty. We've got the news behind us, which is good. And it was all good news this time, which was very nice. We've received... Yes?
We can retrofit some bad news on it if you want. You want me to throw in some bad news?
I don't. I'm so tired
Let's press on then.
Let's pass on that. Let's just, keep it positive.
Don't say I didn't offer.
Dram Golf says keep it secret, keep it safe, keep it positive, keep it, I don't know.
Keep it high, keep it tight.
Keep it high, keep it tight. We received a couple of emails, but there was one in particular that you wanted to bring to our listeners' attention.
It is so beautifully apropos.
Oh, I love that word. Apropos.
You ready?
Born ready, Jason.
So this is the wonderful Christopher Sebastian, a.k.a. Seabass.
Do you think I feel like I may have asked you this question, but do you think he pronounces his last name Sebastian? Or like you do? Or do you think he just says Sebastian, like an American does? Sebastian.
Moving on. I feel attacked. I feel both seen and attacked. Had to follow up with the excellent feedback on the lists of whiskey episodes. And I like his
yes.
plural on the
Yep,
episodes.
yep.
I loved the extra episode on it, especially the version with only your voice. Don't tell Joshua.
Oh,
And then the tongue sticking out the emoji face. Wow. And your top fives just sped on by way too quickly. Mm-hmm. I was so pleased to hear the inclusion of Wee Beastie, as I had been planning on emailing you about it anyways. I remembered you having mentioned it maybe a month ago in an episode, and I picked up a bottle for us to go on a family camping trip. I put an incredibly reasonable dent in that bottle over the weekend. Drinks perfectly next to a fire and outdoors, which, yes, 1,000,000 times yes.
100%.
Also, accompanied it with reading so much of Freddie and Frederica by Mark Helprin. One of the most hilarious and beautifully written books I've read in quite some time.
Okay, I thought he was
Thanks.
going to talk about Freddy Krueger. This makes more sense. Continue, sorry.
Yeah, Seabass and I, we email on a different plane. It's a lot of fun. Thanks for all your hard work. Cheers, Chris, where he misspelled Seabass, but we'll let him away with it. But it's so great, right? It's one of those things that we talked about in each of those top fives that we put together, where it should be bottles that you pick up at a liquor store and you don't think twice about it. It should be bottles you take off into the wilderness and you put a quote-unquote incredibly reasonable dent in them.
Yes.
That's how we wanted that list to go.
Yep.
And I think we pulled it off. I will say I have followed up in my search for Glenmorangie 18 as I think that was part of an honourable recommendations section where I'd said I really want to recommend a Glenmorangie, but I don't have a store Glenmorangie that's a go-to. And you said, have you tried the 18? And so I've got an order in for the 18, and then the Craigellachie 13 OB that was on your list, I've got the same order, has got my Craigellachie 13 on it as well.
Okay, so it's not with you yet, but it is soon.
Exactly. Well, it's on the same order that's got Scorch for us, and it's got some Offerman, Lagavulin, and Guinness on it. So it's an okay little order.
Okay. Well,
It's coming together.
in the spirit, see what I did there? In the spirit of Christopher Sebastian's Seabass's email, we got a comment from Dr. Matt Bishop, also regarding the top five list, your top five, my top five, and Dr. Matt offered up his top five as well.
Are we okay taking a break before you read the
Yeah.
Matt Bishop? So, in the spirit of Ellenstown, rumoured word on the street, Ardbeg, and like the classic of Isla, rumoured word on the street, Lagavulin, we got word last year about a continuing release that is a Duncan Taylor Dimensions bottling, just simply of an Isla blended malt, where the word on the street is that this comes from Ardbeg, and it would be November of 1997 distillate.
Elijah was 4 years old. Our very own Elijah was 4 years old when this was distilled. He was just a wee
Jess
baby.
was 8.
Oh my gosh.
I was 1 year into my whiskey journey.
I was touring the country with my old band. There you go.
Very different times. and so this is supposedly 20-year-old Ardbeg. I have no idea if that's true or not, but I bought bottles for myself and Joshua.
let me ask you a question here, right? Let's make the assumption that it is, and Dr. Matt, we will get to your thing here. Let's make an assumption that it is 20-year-old Ardbeg. As someone who prefers his Ardbegs on the younger side, how's this one for you at full cast strength?
It's nice. Even as old Ardbeg, I wouldn't say I recognize it as such.
Interesting. It's just coming off as Isla for you?
Was Ardbeg really distilling November of 97?
I remember the distillery, famously reopened in 1997. I thought it was in September, but maybe it was earlier. Given that this is November 1997 distillate, that'd be kind of cool if this was some of the earlier distillate to come off the stills after its reopening, but I don't know of any place online that specifies, when spirit started coming off the still again. I remember talking with Jackie and just them, coming to the distillery saying, holy crap, have we got a load of work ahead of us to get this up and running again.
Yep, moving from the mainland to Isla.
Yeah.
And having where the cafe is now just be a sheep buyer with the roof falling in and just sheep shit everywhere. Yeah, it's come a long way. Gosh, we're back on that historical spectrum again. Let's give the floor back over to the good doctor.
Yeah, Dr. Matthew Bishop. So, and this is Matt Bishop, Dr. Matt, talking about his top 5. And this was on the Single Cast Nation members only Facebook page. And so it says, so Joshua Hatton and Jason Johnston Yellen, you asked us to comment on our own list of 5 must-have official bottlings. This is difficult as my spending is limited, and as such, I'm tending, like Jason, to have mainly limited releases. I also don't want to include those on your list for fear of copying. However, this can't be helped, as you'll see below. I've not numbered them, so they're not in any order of preference. And so, you ready?
Yep, I am indeed.
The first one he mentions, Springbank 15-year-old, which was my entry there. And he says it's full of Campbelltown funk. Whiskey number 2 for the good doctor is Deanston 18. And now I'm going to call the doctor out here, and you'll understand why. Because his parenthetical comment is full of Deanston malty DNA. He's using DNA in the way he told us DNA should not be used, if I remember correctly.
You can't spell Deanston without DNA.
Holy shit, that's true. Wow. Okay. The next one is Balblair 18, and parenthetical comment there, still sobbing about this not being a vintage bottling, but we must move on. Full of the ripest autumn fruits. I'm going to take a pause here. There are a lot of people that lament Balblair moving from vintage and going to age-stated whiskeys. However, interestingly enough, you don't find the same lamentation regarding Glenrothes moving from vintage to age-stated whiskeys. So how do you feel? Or do you even care that it goes from vintage to age-stated?
I like the precision of an age statement, even though, yes, we know older casks could be included in the preparation. Mm-hmm. But the vintage, to me, was always too much of a moving target, where you needed to know your distillation year, you needed to know your bottling year. Yeah. And then I always think of my very dear friend, a business partner, Joshua Hatton, where you then have to do moving math. And that's a lot to ask. I think that's unfair, to be honest. And so having an emblazoned age statement, I think, is a little bit of a helpful shortcut for people. So I will say this, though.
Yeah.
I really do enjoy Balblair, and I would love to get some Balblair bottled for Single Cast Nation.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I would there's many things I would do to get a Cask of Pale Blair.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
I would say that there are, and we'll go on with this list, but I will say that there are some instances where a vintage or a particular year really works for distilleries, right? With Benriach, you've got 1976. With Glendronach, you've got 1993, right? With Bowmore, you've got Ollie Chilton saying 2000 and 2001 is where it's at for him, right? And so I think there's something to be said about what a distillery will do on a given year based on what's happening. And it's kind of nice to be able to cast an eye back to that vintage, even if it was released in 2015 and then subsequently in 2017. You get to track that vintage. I think that can be cool, but I do like the precision of an 18-year age statement.
You have that wonderful moment from John McDonald, and you were, bless you, hashtag blessed, bless you. You tried to go to bat on behalf of marketing departments earlier in this podcast. John McDonald has a tremendous story of being called up. And I'm not going to say which department called him up, but he got a phone call from one of their internal departments saying the 18-year-old is absolutely killing it, but we're all out. And John said, I'm glad that it's been absolutely killing it. That's great to hear. And the person said, so we're going to need you to make some more. And he said, that's not how whiskey works.
Isn't that funny? Like that same story has been told about Springbank. I remember, I think Ranald Watson mentioning he had someone in a tour saying, "Oof, I really like this 18-year-old." And him saying, "Well, I'm glad you like it. There really is no more to be sold." And the comment was, "Can you make some more?" And he said, "Yeah, it's going to take another 18 years to get there." But isn't that interesting?
But I think there are the departments who make the whiskey and age the whiskey, and there are the departments that sell the whiskey. And I'm not sure they speak the same language, as was alluded to in today's episode. But back to the good doctors list.
Yes. So the next one that Dr. Matt points out is one of my all-time favorites. And if we had done a top 10 list, I think that I may put this in that. And his is the Cragganmore 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Yep.
I thought about us not having that on our list. Mm-hmm. The strength on it, I don't think elevated it certainly to my list. I will say this, and we talked about him earlier in this episode, good old Uncle Carl England. He fell head over heels in love with the Cragganmore 10 Cask strength release.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is
15,000 bottles.
Yes. So some of my favorite Diageo, the special releases, it's Cragganmore. It's Cragganmore and Lagavulin. Those are my two go-tos when it comes to the distillery, the Lagavulin special releases. Anyway, so
did you see the new labeling on the Lagavulin?
I did, yeah.
That special release?
Kind of like
20-something-year-old, 26, 27?
Yep. I'm currently wearing +3 chainmail and a +3 Glencairn, Vorpal Glencairn for drinking those.
I'm sure someone somewhere is loving this.
Someone is. Anyone who's played D&D is loving this. So the reason he loves the Cragganmore, he says, is full of gentle wood smoke and delicate floral notes. And then yes.
Very quickly, I know I've said this on the podcast before, very dear friend of mine, Joe Pergola, when we lived together in Eastern Washington, we both taught philosophy at Washington State University, me only for a semester. And then I moved to University of Idaho. It didn't go so badly that I lost my job entirely. I just moved universities. His eldest at that time was about 3 years old and called Cragganmore the Winnie the Pooh whiskey because it was so honeyed.
Oh, wow. Look at that. 3-year-olds are good. They're so in tune with their senses, right? Everything is sense with them. I like that a lot.
Right? Wasn't that good? So anyway.
Yep.
So here we go. Is that 4? Are we 4 in at this point?
That's 4. We're 4 in.
Here we go. Drum roll. The
4 on the
last
floor.
one. This is the one the last one to make the cut here.
Bunnahabhain,
No.
18-year-old. What do you mean no? What do you mean no?
I had this conversation with Jess last week. Bunnahabhain has never, ever been on my radar. I like the 12, right? They revamped it. We talked over it with Kirsty.
No.
Blah, blah,
Hold
blah.
on. I'm going to pause. I need to pause
Let me
you
finish.
here. No. You're getting paused. And you're getting paused because I will not soon forget a comment you had made to me. And we talked about this when we had Kirsty McCallum on. You had messaged me or texted me or emailed me somehow, some way when that Bunnahabhain 12 was re-released.
Yes.
At 46.3% alcohol, and subsequently
Yes.
so was the 18-year-old. You said to me, have you tried the new Bunnahabhain 12? And I said, no, I haven't. That whiskey's never excited me. And you had said, it's now bottled at 46.3% alcohol. This whiskey is a revelation. Those were your words.
Those were my words. But, no other part of Bunnahabhain has ever held my attention. I think, that 12 became a point on an OB map that was very good and vital. But I don't go searching the others. It's only with Jess, who loves Bunnahabhain.
She does.
Who you just mentioned Lagavulin a moment ago as the Diageo special releases. That's one of the 2 that you keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Her attention to Bunnahabhain special releases is unlike anybody else I know anywhere.
Yeah.
And so it's only through Jess that I now pay a little bit more attention to Bunnahabhain. To hear Dr. Matt bring up, he's only got 5 spots. This is the last whiskey that made the cut into his top 5.
Shows
I'm
you
not
how
saying it's his 5th of 5. I'm
Yeah.
just saying it's the last one to make the cut.
Yeah.
See, now I'm going to have to get some Bunnahabhain 18.
I think you need to.
Gosh.
I will
Okay.
say, however, and this is my own taste, the Bunnahabhain 12 is still good. It's not as good as it originally was good when it became good, if you know what I mean. It's still nice, but it's lacking something, my own personal taste. It's been a while since I had the Bunnahabhain 18, and I feel as if I need to revisit that as well. And what I like about Dr. Matt's inclusion of the Bunnahabhain 18, for me, when it comes to that distillery, I much prefer their unpeated whiskey slash very, very lightly peated. I know there's an argument over that. And so this being unpeated piques my interest. And so now I'm gonna revisit that. And let me say one last thing, because it looked like you wanted to say something, so I'm gonna pause you. I'm not gonna allow you to do that. I just want to finish this out.
I don't think I've been unpaused, to be honest. I've now been paused twice. Can you do that with a VC?
Zip it.
You could double pause a laser disc. I remember that.
So his parenthetical comment regarding the Bunnahabhain 18, and then I'll close it out after that, is can't not have an Isla, but this is always on my shelf as I can smell the West Coast from my glass. And then he goes on and he says, an honorable mention would be the Mortlach 16, full of hefty mouthfeel and is sweet and Scottish tablet. Jason, you may have to explain to Joshua. Now, I know what tablet is.
You know what tablet is.
I do know, and I don't like it, but I still know what it is.
It's
I don't like the texture.
hardcore.
I don't like the texture. The flavor's good, but the texture, yeah.
Yeah, condensed milk meets boiling sugar allowed to harden into a flat and then cut into cubes. Yeah, it's serious business. But when you grow up in Scotland, it is funny because we do look over to the United States and we talk about, oof, those Americans have got such a sweet tooth, right? If you're European and you come to America and you get a soda at a fast food joint, the first thing that hits you is how sweet it is. It's incredible how sweet it is.
Yeah.
And yet I think about the sweets of my youth in Scotland, and it's all incredibly sweet, incredibly so. But it's a sugar cane sweetness rather than a sugar syrup sweetness. And I think there could be a difference there.
Well, the last thing I'll say about this is how sweet it is to be loved by you, Jesse.
Oh, and it's true. There is no denying. No denying. That's interesting. I like Matt's. I like Matt alluding to the smell of the West Coast. I like that a lot.
Agreed. Right. I like this
That's
bringing you back to a sense of place, which is quite nice.
So just very quickly list his 5 so that I can commit them to memory in short form.
Perfect. So his 5 are Springbank 15-year-old, Deanston 18-year-old, Balblair 18-year-old, Cragganmore 12-year-old, and Bunnahabhain 18-year-old.
That's an interesting list. That really is an interesting list. I like that. I will ruminate over that as my day becomes a week, becomes a month. That's good. I like that.
So if you want to reach out to us in a similar manner in which Christopher Seabass reached out to us. Oh, right. Go ahead.
Can I pause you for 1 second, my friend?
Louise. Yeah, go ahead.
There's no better time to bring up an email from James Foster.
Oh, yes.
And like you, I do need to get out of here. I do need to bring this recording to a close. But again, the Foster email is apropos for what we're covering here.
Okay.
So, you said it earlier, as if it was a bad thing. I don't feel that we've been shitting on marketing departments today, but we've certainly been drawing attention to them. And Foster's email...
You've been drawing flies to them as you shit on them.
But here's the thing. For me, it hasn't been from a great height. We haven't shit on them from a great height. Okay. And that's a very different proposition.
That's a very good point.
Right. And so this actually comes in from the end of April. This is actually only from about 4 weeks ago from Foster, so we haven't left him hanging too long. My wife is currently shouting at the dog in the living room. I don't know if my microphone is picking up any of her hollering. And Joshua's just throwing things across his office here. So
my earbud fell
normal
out my head.
Service will be resumed in just a second.
Okay, so
let's get wrapped up and let's get out of here. Okay. So, James Foster, I just listened to your revulsion to the extra words in quote-unquote pin number and quote-unquote ATM machine. During that exchange, Joshua said that something was quote-unquote very unique. Funny thing. Shit. I forgot to tell you why I laugh when I hear the word unique. It's because something either is unique or it isn't. It doesn't make sense to say something is very unique in almost the same way that one shouldn't say pin number. Once you've said pin, you've already said number. And once you've said very, you've ruled out the possibility of saying unique. To quote Tom Lehrer, Lehrer, if you haven't enjoyed my song, you've yourself to blame if it's too long. You should never have let me begin. And that's it. Foster's out of here on that quote. I love it. And so here's a thing. And why I thought this was apropos. What do we hear from marketing departments about this unique whiskey and that extremely unique whiskey and this other very unique whiskey. There's one part of this where no matter, you even talk about unique casks of whiskey. And you and I with Single Cask Nation have always tried to talk about singular moments in time.
Yes. Yep.
When it comes to a particular cask, rather than falling into the trap of this unique cask and that unique cask and this other unique cask. Because there is a point at which, by the time you've put liquid into a different coloured bottle with a different coloured or different type of label in a different type of gift carton, right? All of those things are unique to that product. But it's a banal point that is temporally, spatially accurate, but completely uninteresting, right? And so to use unique as a selling point on a whiskey is to suggest that you've run out of all other points, right? And so focus on the interesting nature of a particular release and really get behind that. And to bring our episode full circle is to identify what Bill Lumsden wants to present in his whiskey projects and what the marketing department wants to jump on as unique qualities of a release. Dragon cask, dark sherry casks, right? A couple of the entries that we've covered so far.
Yeah.
And so I love Foster bringing up, you can't have very unique. And I would go farther to say within whiskey marketing, we ought not have unique go on in there either.
After hearing what James Foster had to say, after you not clarifying but building upon his words, I agree with you. But not everybody thinks that way, right? That's why marketing works for every industry, because no one thinks this way, right? That's just it.
But if we're going to rail against caramel colouring, and if we're going to rail against chill filtration, if we're going to rail against the over dilution of OB releases, then we ought to also rail against marketing's use of the word unique.
Well, I am going to rail against recording too much longer here, because this has been a long episode. So what I will say to people, if you, like the good Christopher Sebastian, a.k.a. Seabass, or James Foster, a.k.a. James Foster, want to email us, you could do so, questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com. If you feel so inclined as to reach out to us on Facebook like the good Dr. Matt Bishop did, if you're a Single Cask Nation member and you're not on our members-only Single Cask Nation page, please, like Jason had said earlier, look for the page, ask to join the page, answer the questions that it asks you. Very simple questions, just answer them, and we will let you in. And you can also reach out to us at our One Nation Under Whiskey Facebook page. If you're one of those crazy people on Twitter, we are at One Nation Whiskey. And if you're on Instagram, we are at One Nation Under Whiskey. So you can contact us in all of those different ways. Jason, is there anything that you want to say? Because you've got this sort of confused look on your face. Is there something you want to say before we get out of here? So the interesting thing, dear listener, is as I was asking Jason that question, his computer, I think the scientific term is shit the bed. And so I'm just looking at him through our FaceTime thing, and he's waving, and he's nodding, and he's smiling, and he's winking, and please pull your pants up, sir. He's clinking glasses or bottles together. Jason, thank you. Listeners, thank you. Dr. Bill, Thank you. David Blackmore, who helped coordinate the conversation between us and the good Dr. Bill, thank you as well. Until next time, dear listener, cheerio. 2 chins, as Jason says, and he's blowing kisses. Cheers, everybody.